Welcome to Wild Turkey Science, a podcast made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow. I'm Dr. Marcus Lashley, Professor of Wildlife Ecology at the University of Florida.
And I'm Dr. Will Goolsby, Professor of Wildlife Ecology and Management at Auburn University. We're both lifelong hunters and devoted scientists who are passionate about hunting, managing, and researching wild turkeys.
In this podcast, we'll explore turkey research, speak to the experts in the field, and address the difficult questions related to wild turkey ecology and management.
Our goal
is to serve as your connection to wild turkey science.
Speaking of, podcasts, we've got a couple real pros here with us today.
Yeah, for sure. You guys have been doing this a lot longer than us.
I'd say we got a few underneath our belt.
What episode number are you guys on?
Adam, you probably got a better track of
our
it.
Our feed is somewhere. So we added, you guys have come on the Sawdust and Fire with Hunter and Thomas.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we're somewhere between, it's hard to say because we've kind of switched RSS feeds, but we're somewhere between 550 and 700.
Wow.
700 episodes?
Somewhere in there.
Good Lord.
I'd say it's probably just north of 600, but south of 650.
Wow.
What's left to talk about?
Everything, fellas, everything.
Do you ever run out? I mean...
No. We run out of the time to do the topics that we come up with.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think you guys should be commended for sticking to it for that long. I mean, that's incredible.
Appreciate it.
When you travel the country like we do, consulting, and you go to a property and you're like, oh, here's a new spin on that topic we covered 3 years ago.
Yeah.
No connection in the seriousness, but it's like the Bible was written a long time ago, but we still talk about it and we still break it down. And I feel like with these topics, you're always kind of doing a new spin or looking at it a little differently, to where you never run out of the content.
Yeah. It seems like there's always one person out there that's like, what about this situation? And you're like,
exactly.
I thought we covered this comprehensively, but this is a case in point that we didn't.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I was going to say one thing that I have enjoyed over the years is I'll talk to different landowners and one will ask a question or they were thinking about something a different way and it just opens a completely new door.
Exactly.
And then I completely rearrange my own thoughts on things sometimes, which is really fun.
I think the other thing that keeps it fresh is one, you're seeing and you're experiencing as you guys are traveling, we're traveling, so many different other perspectives, but then there's different illustrations as well that, kind of come to mind to maybe better explain a specific topic. And I find ourselves doing that. Adam will go to a trip and we'll touch base after that day. And I was thinking about this. This kind of came to mind. It's like, oh, hey, that's a great podcast topic. Sure, we've covered that in general terms years ago, but really at the end of the day, every new illustration, I think, is a different way to reach somebody else or just refresh them that, hey, this general topic is still applies. And here's another way that it can apply to you, or here's another way that you might comprehend it and it sink in this time.
Very good points.
Well, but at the end of the day, maybe we're just beating a dead horse. Who knows?
Well, you still got people listening, so you're doing something right. I was going to say, usually we introduce our guests, but I don't know that you guys need an introduction.
Our next guest needs no introduction.
Your reputation precedes you, so
in this world, anyhow, it may.
Yeah.
But if you haven't listened, Adam, Keith, and Matt Dye have an excellent podcast, Land and Legacy, which shares the name with their wildlife consulting company. Is that a fair characterization? Is that
Yep.
Okay.
You got it.
And I think we probably have a lot of overlap in our listeners, but if not, and you haven't checked out Land and Legacy, highly recommend it. They're providing, great insight onto some of the similar topics that we are. And then also because they travel so much, which is one of the reasons we want to have them on. They have a very, I think, diverse and broad perspective on, wildlife management in many different regions of the U.S.
Yeah, I think that's pretty exciting for us to get a look into behind the scenes of what you guys are thinking about. What are you seeing? That was one of the real reasons that I wanted you to come on to this show, is just to talk about, you see so many properties in so many areas. Are you seeing consistent trends or things that are consistently missing from a wild turkey management standpoint?
Unfortunately, yes.
Absolutely. It's got a little tweak depending on the ecosystem, depending on the region, but for the most part, it's all the underlying problems are almost always there when we're talking about turkeys.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess we could formalize that as a question. What are some of the things that you guys see consistently being problematic from wild turkey standpoint?
I would easily say the most common limiting factor is quality brood rearing cover. Vegetation, insects, the ability for a poult to move that first 2 weeks is obviously critical,
Mm-hmm.
but nesting not as limiting, but when they are hatched on the landscape, can they traverse it and can they get from a adequate, subadequate nest site to brood rearing cover?
Mm-hmm.
And generally, the answer is pretty commonly no. It's just it's such a small fraction of the landscape. It's like, what chance do they have if they do hatch?
Yeah.
Would y'all say that's more related to sunlight availability limitations, or more of the ground cover that there is not conducive?
Little of both. Yeah, I think it's a little of both, to be honest with you, because um, depending on each site, when we consult, I was in Maine a month or so ago, which was our 32nd state that we've worked. And so
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
just this spring, I've worked from western Oklahoma to north central, kind of central Maine. Um, so, you think about all the different ecosystems and landscapes between those two, and you can look at ultimately trying to identify brood rearing cover. And in one part of the world, it's because there's not enough sunlight. It's dense forest. Um, in another part, there is adequate sunlight, but there's not enough disturbance, so it's grown up too thick.
Mm-hmm.
And another part of the world is there's enough sunlight, but there's too much disturbance, and there's grazing occurring. And it's like
Mm-hmm.
everybody's just off a few clicks of being even okay brood rearing. It's like one extreme
Mm-hmm.
to the other, and nobody really floats in the middle.
I think, and we've done a podcast talking about that middle ground, right? I feel like every landowner is on one extreme or the other, and it's like, let's just meet in the middle somewhere. And I think honestly, we're going to cover and overlap so many different necessary and missing vegetation structures, composition on the landscape, that whether it's deer, whether it's turkey, really do the best in, right? But man, there's the middle
Mm-hmm.
ground is just it's almost a wash. Um, you just
Yeah.
see one side of the spectrum or the other.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was going to ask, it seems to me, and I'd love to hear you guys talk about it from your perspective. It seems to me that the spaces that would be really good for brooding cover, there's just some sort of alternative objective that's keeping people from using it that way. And principally in our part of the world, that's often it's some sort of sod forming grass, or all of the openings are being planted in some sort of cool season plot for deer that it doesn't turn into something that's really good brooding cover. And I just is that pretty consistent with what you guys are seeing, or does that differ based on where you're at?
I think you're right on one of the biggest problems that I see, in let's just say that a lot of the farms we travel and see, most of the open ground, if it is timber country and it's not crop or big cattle or prairie, I think a lot of guys probably most of their property is timbered, is the majority of
Mm-hmm.
that property. So the openings are typically planted in food plots.
Mm-hmm.
And props to guys like you who have really done a lot of research, and Dr. Craig Harper, on different herbicides to control different weeds. And, I feel like 15 years ago, food plots still were pretty weedy. It wasn't any problem to
Mm-hmm.
go and find a guy's plot that had been plowed up, disc up, and, there's a lot of bare ground, and fertility wasn't great. And there was just, it was almost unintentional brood rearing plots.
Mm-hmm.
Now I see guys, they've really figured out how to get clover to be just thick and lush and beautiful. And it's like, yeah, that's great for a deer, but for a brood, it's not ideal.
Mm-hmm.
And then you see the soil health movement, where there's a lot of focus on cereal rise and lots of
Batch.
seeds per acre, and it's very thick. And so you take
Mm-hmm.
what little open ground there was on this property, and you turn it into some of the thickest vegetation. It's like, oof, that's kind of reaching a goal for successful food plots for deer. But if you're looking at the turkey standpoint, it's not ideal.
Well,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where you have so much competing for different goals, right? Because a lot of properties that will work, or you guys are probably working as well, or folks listening. Sure, this is Wild Turkey Science podcast, but a lot of people do like to deer hunt too. And this is just where we have to really understand the management and the techniques that we're using. It may be beneficial for one of those species, but it may be more on the negative side for another species that we still want to promote, but we're not understanding in the whole grand scheme of things that deer can forage on a whole lot of acres if you manage your timber appropriately. You don't have to rely on the food plot. Those can be supplemental for the specific time of the year, but a turkey, and specifically a poult, doesn't have that opportunity nearly as much as a deer. Can they still forage appropriately in a well managed woodland? Yeah, but I think it's much easier to manage existing openings or portions of those openings that you have on a food plot or on a property, as quality brood rearing cover. It's
Mm-hmm.
easy to create brood rearing cover. You just have to be intentional about it. Like I've
Yeah.
seen people accidentally create some really good brooding cover where maybe they did disc a plot and it got too hot, and it was a failed spring or summer
Mm-hmm.
food plot, and turned out to be amazing. Or it was a guy who was doing a lot of dirt work with heavy equipment, excavators, dozing, this and that. He did it late winter, spring, moved a lot of dirt around. And then comes back like super weedy, mare's tail, common ragweed everywhere. And it's like, you don't really realize what you just did, but you accidentally created some amazing brooding cover.
Mm-hmm.
And congratulations to you. And then, right, there's so many birds come
Mm-hmm.
fall on that property. It's like, I'm not surprised, but this was accidental. And it's not hard to manage those openings for both species, but you have to consider turkeys when you're doing food plots in the way that Adam just described, that food plot shift from
Mm-hmm.
15 years ago to now. They're managed differently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one thing you made me think of that's an important point as well. I just in the recent couple of weeks have visited with a couple of landowners, and there was a plot. In both cases, it was kind of funny that they forgot. They forgot to do whatever they had been doing to all their other plots.
Yeah.
And we get to it, and I'm like, oh man, now here's what we're talking about. Like that was the accident.
It was
And
accidental.
one of them, we flushed the hen with the only poults that they had seen on the property that year. We
Yeah.
flushed it out of one of those plots. But one thing, the reason I was bringing that up is I think we still have some work to do on giving people a vision for what brooding cover looks like. Because a lot of people just view it as a weedy plot that they need to go mow or turn up or, whatever their preferred method is. But maybe that is part of the problem. We just haven't quite gotten there with the majority of landowners on what they should be visualizing.
I
Yeah.
agree.
And I think, Matt, you touched on something really important there that I've only recently come to realize and appreciate is I think a lot of folks view creating like brooding cover as an all or nothing proposition.
Mm-hmm.
And, especially if they're a smaller landowner with limited openings like you described, they only have so much open ground to work with, and they want to allocate that land to their food plots for, if they hunt both deer and turkeys. But it's as simple as, maybe I actually spoke with a landowner about this a few weeks ago that had a bad, annual ryegrass problem in all their food plots, which was just crushing their brooding cover,
Yep.
I spoke to that same landowner, I think.
Yeah. And he's like, there's no way that I have the time or the money to get rid of all this ryegrass and all these food plots, because they're not even planting ryegrass anymore. I mean, they're trying to plant other cool season crops, but you know how it volunteers. And I said, well, what if you just take out the, 1 to 2 tractor widths around the outside edge? Turkeys will respond to that. And I feel like in general, just, doing less in some of those areas, you still have to obviously have disturbance, but doing less in those areas and, like Marcus was saying, just not mowing them at the beginning of every spring or summer period really results in a surprising level of response from turkeys. Like you see use happen immediately. Another landowner I worked with last summer was skeptical about fallowing some of his fields when we first met. And now 1 year later, after he's seen the response from turkeys, he's like, that's where I see all my turkeys. Can I do more of this? Can I allocate more acreage to fallow? And I was like, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And guess what? That's way cheaper than planting a food plot and paying for seed and amendments. It's just letting it go fallow.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of the same plants that we're trying to get for turkeys are very high quality forage for deer in that plot. It's not like you gave it up for deer, if that's your objective. One thing I wanted to add, I've been thinking about it quite a bit, is this all or none idea. That's one of the reasons that connectivity is so important. Like, you don't have to have brood cover everywhere, but you want it to be accessible from anywhere.
Yes.
So that's a balance between how much are you investing in converting to brood cover and how are you distributing it with corridors to and from other vegetation.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is, Craig Harper, years ago, I heard him using that term odd areas. And, you look at those areas when you hear him say it and you start thinking about farms. And for us traveling the country and seeing these different farms, and, there's a reason why Craig says it a lot, because it is happening in a lot of places.
And when you look for them, they're everywhere.
They're everywhere. The edges of fields. I think one of the things that I want to touch on, kind of circle back, I talked about the food plots, but I see it a lot where people neglect, or they say they're not big enough, but they're little openings on the road, or it may be an intersection where 2 roads meet, and it's like a big turnaround spot right there, and it ends up being 1/10 of an acre, but you get to it and it's like, this is all crabgrass. I visit it in April, and it's just, dead brown crabgrass, but it's thick as the hair on a dog's back. And you're just like, this is easy. This is low hanging fruit. And you drive down the road and it's like you've sunlighted the road. There's 10 yards on both sides, but it's just a bunch of thick Himalayan blackberry, or, even just straight blackberries. And it's like, yeah, that's beneficial, but we need some more herbaceous. We need more forbs. We need more ragweed. We need a little bit more disturbance here, because this is just too thick. And I think that's the low hanging fruit of the connectivity on the farm, is roadsides, road intersections, weird turnaround spots on food plots. Like they're out there.
Yeah.
The margins of ponds. I see that as a big one too. Like,
Sure.
You always have all this mowed grass and like a dam and everything like that could be excellent brooding cover too.
I think, Marcus, you touched on something earlier. You're saying we need to continue to educate what these areas should look like. I'm going to take that a step farther, and I think that we need to continue the education of the value that these areas do provide. Yes, we need to tell people how to recognize them, But I think that most people just think that because there's an aspect of bare ground, it looks weedy, that it's inconsequential to the overall life cycle, to overall forage production, to like they're not connecting broadleaf weeds, flowering weeds to insect life, and they're not conceptualizing right all that vegetation structure composition actually does promote. And so because there's not value placed with it, it's easy to then go and mow it, or it's easy to just change the management around it, or not promote it in those certain areas, because it just like it doesn't look impressive, if you will. Like it's not like a beautiful clover plot that's blooming and all these things. Like it can look like it's an accidental, like, oh man, you could do a donut in a field or a turnaround spot with the UTV and turn up some dirt, and you're like, well, actually, hey, that's the very small example of what we're trying to go for. But like that on the right
I'm going to
scale,
incorporate that into my management. That sounds fun.
4-wheeling.
Just do donuts and droppings.
But
well, I think that you're keying in on something, Matt, that's important, and maybe this is part of the problem. It looks unkept.
Correct.
Absolutely.
And when I was with those couple of landowners, both of them were embarrassed when we got to it.
And you were excited, like it's a paradigm shift.
Yeah, I was like, all right, here we go.
Yeah.
And they were embarrassed because it looked so weedy and unkept compared to what they had been doing in their other plots.
Yeah, that's it. The recreational mowing and trying to bring back the English lawn. It's not just like it's like an ingrained in their genetics to have that, and to see stuff growing up for a lot of people is just like it's neglect of your own place.
Yeah.
And I think that might be one of the things that we see a lot, just in, even if they know it, even if they've heard it and they've seen it on social media, trying to pull back the ability to mow is very hard for a lot of people. And frankly, I get it. I can kind of understand that. Like, on my family farm, we've got cows, and we're trying to incorporate cows with wildlife, and it's like, there's a struggle there. It's like a devil on one shoulder and an angel on the other, and you're like, I want to do what's right, but the devil in me is like, get the mower. That looks bad.
Well, I've got a neighbor. I was just gonna say I've got a neighbor to piggyback on what Adam was saying. 40 years it was a dairy, then transitioned out of dairy operation, had 300 cows on 150 acres open for 40 years, and then transitioned into beef. And the fields are not well kept whatsoever. Adam, you know it, you've seen it, and this summer and the dryness that we're getting into, it looks even worse. But I would say they're quote unquote cool season based with lots of weeds, and there's quail whistling on it right now. And it's like, what we anticipate to be, this competing interest of, what a true cattle farm should look like, and all these things. Like, man, some of the worst kept cattle farms have got the best wildlife benefit. But it's like, how do we from a mindset balance all those goals out? And I think a lot of recreational farms properties need to kind of step back and say, hey, what are my intended goals here? Is it to make this thing look absolutely beautiful every single where, or is it to produce wildlife? And I think that they have a hard time conceptualizing, balancing those goals, because they again don't understand the value that weeds in this air quote unkept look really does provide wildlife.
One thing that kind of got me thinking about this whole topic philosophically, I discovered in a place that I didn't expect to find it. It was actually one of you guys' Sawdust and Fire episodes with Hunter and Thomas, and they were talking about how, previous generations of Americans were influenced by the time that so many American men spent in Europe in World War II. Did you guys listen to this episode?
No.
Okay. I didn't mean to put you on the spot there. I know you don't have time. Y'all got like 700 episodes. You can't listen to all of it. But I can't remember if it was Hunter or Thomas that was explaining that their view of land management and kind of landscape architecture, if you will, was very influenced by that European model due to the time that they spent there. And they wanted to bring that back to the United States, where everything has a place and everything in its place. So you've got your pasture over here, you've got an orchard over here, you've got your timber over here, and it's all very manicured and isolated. And he said one thing that he sees as a silver lining is something that he anticipates continuing to develop over the next several decades, is that, all of us now, or not all of us, but obviously, but a lot more men of that age are growing beards because we weren't those military guys that came from that background. And along with that, I don't think we as much, and I'm probably doing a poor job of characterizing this, but we don't have that same mindset, right? So we're a lot more open to allowing the land to develop a bit more naturally, if you will. That's a bad term, but just we don't have as much of an urge for everything to be manicured like that generation may have.
What I just heard, Will, is that you said that having a beard is correlated with having lots of turkeys. Positively correlated.
You heard it here first, folks.
That's all I got out of all of that. I'm kidding. But that is kind of interesting. That's an interesting perspective.
It was. Yeah, it got me to thinking. Like, there's these cultural trends that we never think about that have implications for wildlife management.
Mm-hmm.
I think another one that really gets landowners a lot is everyone wants to focus on the open ground, because I feel like no one really wants to tackle the workload that is involved with like true timber management, right? That's either they think it's either well, let's just have a logging operation. We're going to wait till a logging operation and they'll take care of that. But for me, my time or my knowledge or my equipment, I can sit in the AC cab and I can work this and just turn it into a food plot, manicure the heck out of it, beautify it. And hey, food plots are great, right? But the timber goes to junk because you're not touching it, or you're scared to, or you feel like you're going to mess up. There's that open ground for those goals of the farm because you don't spatially recognize what's happening for the species you're intending to manage. And it's just, if you will, like the easiest places to be able to manage for most landowners, whether it's education, knowledge, or time, that they have to be able to devote to it.
Yeah, for sure. And this is definitely something that I wanted to ask you guys about on that note, because Matt, when you're starting to talk about managing the forested areas, I'm assuming that would involve some aspect of timber harvest. I think Marcus and I have a biased perspective being kind of in the Pine Belt. We do have challenges with implementing commercial timber harvest on some properties, but that's not like a widespread problem. Are there places that you guys work where you do see it as a widespread problem?
Logging?
Yeah,
I just want some clarification.
Getting a commercial
logging
timber
is the problem?
Getting a commercial timber harvest implemented on a property where that's part of the prescription for wildlife objectives.
It's in the pines. Yeah. To me, it's always, I don't see it being a problem in the hardwood places nearly as much as I see it in the pines. I feel like most of the time, I could say that 80% plus of the time that I'm on a property and we're like, we need to get some stuff cut, and we can't. It's because it's pines, and it almost kind of gives you a little bit.
So is that a market barrier or a landowner barrier, Adam?
Both. market, as in, the mill just down the road, the mill's closed down and now they're 3 hours from the closest mill, or they don't have enough acreage of it for the mill that's close by to even worry about coming over there and getting it. And I honestly, if I was in the Southeast, I might have a complete disdain for pines, just because of the hurdles that we keep running into in our management plans, where it's just like we visit a property. Oh, look at all these pines. Yeah, I've been trying to get somebody in here, but it's been 5 years. It's like, as we sit and get older, 35 to 40, that would be me. If I have to wait 5 years to get a logger in there, now I'm in my 40s. Now my kids are, getting a little bit more active and doing different things. So now I'm dealing with them or traveling with them, and I'm not able to get on the farm as much. And it's like, the time to improve the habitat is now. Unless you see changes in even government, messaging and environmental messaging, where, it seems like with each day I hear more and more people talking about the importance of trees and growing trees. And it's like, I think until I see a shift where more people are saying we need active timber management, we need to be using these renewable resources, we need to be cutting trees, replanting trees, creating healthy forests. Until I start seeing that, then if I was a landowner in the Southeast, I'd really struggle trying to go back into pines.
Yeah, which is interesting to me because, it wasn't that long ago that I felt like a landowner was better off buying a pine dominated tract because they had more management options on that property than they would if it was dominated by hardwood.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that I was just thinking through that, especially when landowners have challenges trying to move wood. But I think of it a lot from this perspective. When you are going to have your timber harvest, that is a great opportunity for you to set stuff up. For example, the connectivity, daylighting roads. Your roads are already designed for connectivity. That's why they are there. Taking the opportunity, and I talk about it with just about every landowner I go and visit with. When you're getting this stand harvested, take that opportunity to get them to daylight roads. Let's go 2 or 3. Same thing at planting. Don't plant, intentionally on the roadside so that you have that wider margin. Maybe you have a couple of instances where you need more openings in different parts of the property. Like all of those things, that's your entry point.
Yeah.
To get it designed on the landscape, and that's pretty tough if you can't move any wood, for sure.
No
to
doubt.
add one more example to that, Marcus, a strategy that I had not thought about until a couple of weeks ago was you can use a timber harvest as an opportunity to expand your SMZs, your streamside management zones for turkeys. So don't feel like just because the stand ran right all the way, up to 50 feet off the creek that you have to harvest it back to that point. Maybe you just do a heavy thinning in there. Right.
That's the beauty of this. You get to say what they cut and what they don't.
That's a good reminder for all landowners. I worked with two brothers just last week. They're doing great work on their property. They're in Alabama, and they are seeing a lot of turkeys respond. I think the term they said was they're seeing a lot more turkeys on their farm now than before, and they said we didn't really see it happening until we started cutting and burning. So they started, they bought this farm, and there was a big logging operation that came in and clear cut a bunch of stuff, and they're getting ready to replant. But the point of me working with them was to kind of, like I said, they're doing great work. So I was just there to confirm the direction they were headed was a good plan. And that plan was to isolate pockets within these areas that were once pine that got clear cut, and they're going to be planted back in loblolly. And the idea was, let's set aside a couple of acres here and there and leave that in early succession. So like you'll have pines, and then you'll just have these little pockets where there's nothing but whatever responds back in the seed bank, and they'll remove invasives and just keep that going. And it's like, that's the type of management where I'd love to talk to you guys. So here, I'm going to send you a question. If you were, ballpark me, how much money would you make on planting in loblolly pines on 2 acres. If you set that aside and said, okay, this 2 acres, we planted loblolly pine over the course of the life of that planting, how much money will I make on that?
A couple $1,000.
Yeah, not that much.
Over 30
Not that
years.
much.
30-ish years.
Yeah.
And so I think it becomes an easy one for landowners to say, you know what, I'm going to set these few acres aside here and there over the course of 35 years, 12,000 bucks.
Let's just say that practice increases poult rearing success by 1% over that same 30 years. Now we have, let's say a couple dozen more turkeys around. That's more valuable to me. I'd rather have the turkeys than a couple $1,000. Maybe not every landowner can say that, but I'm on that boat.
Yeah. And I mean, you don't have to, if we're thinking about this particular circumstance, you don't have to just make, food plot type patches throughout that stand after the harvest. You could also create lanes through that stand, especially if it's a larger stand that is long and linear, and you know that it's going to potentially serve as a barrier. There goes Marcus with the lights again.
Lights
you know
out.
that once that stand, closes canopy at around 8-10 years old, that turkeys aren't going to move back and forth through it. Well, you've now improved connectivity by putting lanes into it. And you've also can manage for brooding cover within those lanes. So you've increased brooding cover as well. And you could maybe even design those as, shooting lanes if you're a rifle hunter. So you've accomplished multiple objectives. And if you especially budget it out over the number of years that stand is gonna grow for, like we've been talking about, you think about how little you're paying on a per acre basis to realize all those benefits and the return on investment that you're getting, and you compare that to spending sometimes hundreds of dollars per acre per year on planting food plots. It's a pretty big ROI.
I think the biggest way that we're going to get landowners to really shift and start moving is it's not, and I mean, it's not really the education and the feel goodness about doing this work. It's really saving money or making money and success of harvesting, growing deer. And that's one of my biggest points in this discussion is trying to understand that deer hunters, trying to convince a deer hunter why he should do this same management for a turkey and why that's and how that benefits his deer. Because at the end of the day, a majority of the clients we work with are deer hunters first, turkey hunters second, third, fourth, fifth. Maybe they're not even on that. They just enjoy seeing them. Very rarely do we work with people that care more about turkeys than care more about deer.
I was curious, Adam, this is maybe the right time to ask, since based on what you just said. Have you guys seen that transition? Because for me, that was historically the case, and most of the people I work with are deep south. But we went from where they were interested in both species, or deer one, but turkey number 2 or 3, to they've kind of transitioned. Maybe it's just the people that contact me now. I don't know. And that's why I'm asking you. But now it's turkey 1, 2, and 3. And if they're going to have some deer.
Yeah.
No matter what they do, they're going to have some deer. So we're going to quit worrying about that.
Yeah. Deer are very adaptive, way more adaptive than a turkey.
I've seen that perception kind of change. And I'm just curious if you guys have.
A little bit, but it's the Southeast. It's the Southern guys. Hunting turkeys in the South is almost a religion. That's why when people ask me where I'm from, I try to claim the South, even though I kind of flirt that line. People from the North call me a Southerner. People from the South call me a Yankee. But
Are you from the South? Well, how much do you like turkeys? That's what I need to know to determine.
Exactly. Yeah, I think in the South it seems to be more shifting more into turkeys, probably because they're. In my opinion, the South is, especially the Southeast, is where the turkeys are hurting the most. From my field observations, from my discussions with landowners, for sure. For a lot of years, people really, land management was about deer. So it was all your openings were food plots, and you also had feeders, so we were attracting predators. And then the timber, if you weren't doing anything, a lot of times it was not doing anything. But if they did, they were heavy on hinge cuts, and so then it just turned into not controlling invasives. And if I could tell you, if I've seen it once, I've seen it over 100 times where they went in to cut timber to improve it for the deer, and they didn't address the invasive species. Now it's just a big multiflora rose patch or a big autumn olive patch. And it's like nothing can get through that. And we see that all the time. So it's like, how do you get a guy to understand that we're going to manage for turkeys and deer, but it's going to make his deer hunting better? And that takes some real strategy, understanding different timber management practices, different ways to manage your open areas. But at the end of the day, I like to say that if you can manage for turkeys and deer, basically we can make the areas we want deer more preferred for deer, and we can take the areas that we don't necessarily want the deer during daylight, during hunting season, and make those more preferred for turkeys. We can have it all.
Yeah, I was going to add about the generation thing. It's kind of being cyclical. Well, the other thing I think that this highlights, thinking from that standpoint, a lot of our landowners, especially in the South, grew up in the heyday. And because of that, not having turkeys gobbling in every direction is not acceptable. And that's one generation away from not being normal and not cared about. So, I think, where you see people transition back and forth, the other thing is true as well. Look at quail. As soon as that was a generation removed, people don't expect to see quail anymore, and they don't care about them anymore.
Didn't grow up hunting them because they weren't there.
But right now, we're kind of in that perfect time to address this issue with turkeys, because most of the landowners grew up when it was heyday. And I personally want to get back to those days, and most people I talk to want to do that as well. But as soon as we have a transition in landowners where they did not grow up with the heyday, then we might be in trouble with turkeys.
I'm going to ask you a question, and I'm going to try to do it without getting bombarded with hate after this, when this podcast releases. But I'm curious, so you can just give me you zipped your lips shut if you don't want to answer it. But how do you feel about that generation? Let's say the generation that got to experience the heyday, but they even got to experience quail. In my experience, I feel like that generation of that age structure or that age bracket of people are harder to convince of the change in the landscape, the changing of everything that's occurred, and try to motivate them. No disrespect to any of them, but it seems like when I'm having a discussion online with people, like, the habitat's changed, we need to be cutting some trees, we need to be thinning timber, we need to be burning. They're like, well, it hasn't changed that much, or there's other problems that are more pressing. But I feel like I get into the younger generation, the 40s and less, those guys are like, give me a torch, I'll set it on fire.
Cut down the trees and burn them.
Exactly. And so I'm curious if you guys have noticed that.
No, yes. Adam, I think it's our most popular episode where we were measuring how many Alabamas of grass we got. That was in direct response, I think, to that. I don't know that it's necessarily all that generation, but we've got a lot of people. I mean, every time we talk about habitat, there's a contingent of people who attack that nothing has changed. Either at their farm scale or at the landscape scale, we hear that. And then immediately the next thing is predators. So I think you're right. I don't know that we would pin it all on the heyday generation, but there's definitely a resistance out there that we feel.
I agree. And it's like our business is habitat management consulting or land consulting, and we talk about the biggest problems we see on the landscape, which is bad habitat, poor management of habitat. So we talk a lot about habitat. We're not anti-trapping, but because we talk all the time about habitat, we get kind of put into that box of that we don't really put an emphasis on trapping, and it's like, I'm pro trapping as the next guy, but I don't talk about it a lot because, frankly, I don't think that it is one of those topics that needs to get talked about a lot on social media with the general public.
Yeah.
And well, it's just down the list too. Usually, we're not close on the things that are above it yet.
Correct.
Yeah, and I think one of the problems with that too is that we have falsely disassociated habitat management from predation management. Habitat management affects the predation process.
Yes.
So trapping is not the only thing that you can do to affect that. And I think the more that we can help people understand that, the better.
I think that's
when we talked about that, Will, we actually found some studies that compare the effect size of trapping versus habitat on predation. And the effect size of habitat is substantial in comparison. Now, granted, that was quail. We don't have that information on turkeys.
Well, and if you boil it down to, okay, I can take a 500-acre property and do a site visit, and they see, maybe 1 or 2 turkeys on camera a year, really poor, basically unhuntable population. And, you could iterate this out, like 100 or 1,000 different properties. You set them up to where some of them you just trap, and some of them you just manage habitat, no predator control. I guarantee you that you run that through enough iterations, and the turkeys are going to respond or have a much greater probability of responding positively in the habitat management scenario than they are in the predator control scenario. It's rare that you build it and they don't come compared to trap it and they do. Does that make sense?
Oh,
very much.
Absolutely. I see it. We see it with, we have several clients. I've sent you guys some videos of the poults that these clients are seeing on their trail cameras. And when I make a post, it's like, I want you to understand, this guy's seeing success. And a lot of times people will automatically say, oh, he must be trapping. So I'm like trying to get out ahead of it. This landowner has done all this, but he hasn't trapped. And people are like, why'd you have to say that? Like, because you guys usually jump to the conclusion that because he's got a bunch of poults, he's trapped.
Isn't that something? I don't know. I'm thinking through. Maybe I have, but I can't remember ever seeing someone, seeing a couple of hens with 12 to 15 poults or something. I don't know that I've ever seen anybody say, man, that guy must be doing some good habitat work. I just don't see that.
No, not at all.
I see it from other biologists.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is definitely, it's a weird conundrum.
Yeah. I get a whole bunch of messages, and you guys probably do too, but I just wanted to add, I get a whole bunch of messages. Hey, I started thinning and burning like you've been talking about, and I saw a bunch of poults with a hen in there, yesterday or whatever. I get that a bunch now, which is awesome.
That was the thing I was going to say, comment earlier, piggybacking onto Adam, the management side of things. Of yes, we've seen changes, and we need to go and we need to do the timber management. We need to do these things, but I think there's a misconception that it's a one phase type project or process, and we're going to see these results. But if you will, there's so many things that are much better if you do phase 1 and phase 2. What I mean by that is, thin the timber and burn, TSI and burn, TSI, invasive species removal, then burn. Like, don't do one and think it's accomplished and it's a one and done type process. Like, this is going to take several re-entries into a site to make it the best that it can be, but follow up. I guess, from a food plot standpoint, right? You spray, you plant, you fertilize, what have you. Like, there's always multiple things to do, but for some reason in the habitat world, it generally seems like someone just does an implementation type process, but then they don't do the maintenance side of things or the continued development of it. And so they don't see the results that maybe we've all talked about, and they get discouraged by it, and they just, again, leave it alone. Or they just don't want to get into that big scale of a project and let a crew do it. I was like, man, you got to continue with phase 1, 2, and 3.
It's like, it's almost in everything. It's like momentum management, where it's like it takes a little time to build up momentum, but once you get it going, you start seeing results a lot better. You mentioned with the food plots, like if you go into a food plot area and all you do is, or an area, you knock out a bunch of timber, you're like, this is going to be food plot. Well, you got to amend the soil, you got to get the fertility correct. And it takes a little bit of time to get it to being good and very fertile. Same thing with, you go into a wood block. It's not like you're going to make it beautiful right out of the gate. It takes some momentum and some time to really get it to where you want it. And then you get to coast through it. Invasives are controlled much better. You're controlling a lot of stuff with fire. Same thing with old fields. Once you get that cool season or warm season base removed, then it starts to become just preventative maintenance rather than heavy lifting maintenance.
Right.
Mhm.
And you guys have worked with obviously way more landowners than I have. And do you think it makes sense in my mind, but I don't know if it's a fair assessment because my sample size, like I said, isn't as great as y'all's is. But do you think a lot of landowners kind of maybe try to accomplish too much too quickly when they get a plan, or they buy a property and start trying to manage it and then get burnt out versus breaking it down into more manageable projects and maintaining consistency? Because I think I would rather see a landowner bite off smaller chunks and maintain that consistency rather than, let's say, go out and hack and squirt 50 acres and then just, throw their hands in the air. They're done. They don't have the capacity to do anymore.
The biggest issue I'm seeing is when your time is limited. So you're trying to plan out life, your family deals. You're trying to make sure you're a good father and a good husband and then a good landowner. And when time is limited, you're trying to do the projects that you have to do, which is the food plots and the feeders. And I say that, I'll air quote that you have to do it. And then the time just hasn't allowed for the other stuff. So less time is available to do the stuff that we talk so much on our podcast and you guys talk about on your podcast. And then the other big thing I see is just the inability to plan out a year and say, during this month, I know that I'm going to be doing this. And then this month, I'm going to be doing this. And then in the fall, I'm going to be doing this. It's kind of, we always called it dilly-dally management, where you're so excited to get out of the house and get to the farm that when you get there, you're kind of like a dog chasing a vehicle. Like you're like, and then you catch it and you're like, I don't know what to do with it. And you just end up stuff's broke down, tractor tires flat, and you're like, I didn't really get much done this weekend. But if you had a plan and you knew what you were doing before you got there, you could actually made a difference.
Maybe we need to add a contingency plan in there. If your tractor's broken down, what else can you do?
Yeah. We call it embrace the suck.
They will just hop and they won't implement something all the way through, or they choose to do a technique that doesn't yield based on that amount of time or resource that could have had a much greater effect. But again, it was just either limitations of education of what they're doing, or potentially time, but they can't prioritize the work based on their goals and based on the current habitat needs, and just do that effectively. And that's okay, because we can't all be great at absolutely everything. And that's why there's guys like the four of us who go around and help and teach people and show people, this is your priorities, do these things and do it in this order and do it in these units first, and then we'll get to the rest of it. But master it here, because that's going to have the greatest impact. And if people can get to that type of management rather than trying to address absolutely everything they think they need to do, and just realize, hey, hyper focus here. I'll still see the same amount of result as if I was trying to do all 500 acres. That's a big realization I think a lot of people need to have.
I think that's a super important point, Matt, and it ties both the point you just made together with Adam's, that a lot of times I think landowners end up investing time in things that don't yield a great investment, like filling feeders, for example, because they simply don't know what else to do. We're recording this in late June, and instead of going out and filling feeders, for instance, you could go out into your brooding areas and spot spray, invasives or, woody plants out of your brooding cover. Much greater ROI than filling a feeder.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if
Get rid of
you
your
educate them
crabgrass.
and and give them those ideas, then they'll make more wise decisions about time allocation.
When the first question that we ask is, what are you seeing most limiting across the landscape? We're all in agreement, I think, that that's poult rearing cover. So not only you have a greater ROI on that, it can be much more fulfilling once
Very
you
much so.
realize what you're trying to do, and then you start realizing a little bit of success, and then you start seeing hens running around with poults everywhere. Then it becomes really fulfilling. Go ahead.
Absolutely. I think trying to get people to understand the small victories that you can have rather than the big victory, the mountaintop victory is I killed a Boone and Crockett buck on my farm, is we need to learn to have a little perspective or appreciation for the small victories of seeing a hen with a bunch of chicks following her. Hearing a red cock-headed woodpecker if you're in the southeast, or any other little songbird that we're now seeing on the farm that we hadn't seen before. Taking our wife and her kids out there, and they're seeing it too, and they're getting excited. So they're starting to love the land more. For a lot of years, I tell this story, so I'm sorry if people have heard it before, but I was a humongous consumer of outdoor content when I was a young kid. Like, I watched every hunting show, VHS, read every magazine I could get my hands on. And I got so ingrained with killing a buck that it was food plots and feeders and minerals. And I was putting all the stuff that Walmart was selling out, and was just like, man. And if I didn't kill a buck, it was disheartening. It was very like, this year was a failure. And even as I got older and I got in the outdoor industry filming hunts, it was like, kill deer, put deer on camera, show the success. And I stepped back and I'm like, man, every month that's not deer season is planning for deer season. And it's like this, like, life gets away. And I feel like now where I'm at is like going to the farm, and we were on a farm 2 weeks ago, and Matt can probably back me up on this, but we saw a bobolink bird, for a grassland bird. It's not doing so great, but we saw one of them, and I got excited. I was like, man, that's a bobolink. I even called my brother later that day to tell him I saw a bobolink. And it's like, that's the type of stuff that I hope people can get excited about. It's like, hey, we saw whatever the species that you don't really notice a lot in day-to-day life on the farm, start trying to notice that. Mm-hmm. And then if you're seeing pollinator plants and you're starting to see monarchs, you're starting to see different bugs, you're going, okay, there's a lot more bugs here. Well, guess what? There's a lot more bugs here. Now I have a lot more turkey food or quail food. Mm-hmm. And now we're excited every time we go to the farm.
I was going to say, I think I've seen how many social posts of like, man, just waiting for fall, waiting for spring turkey, the countdowns, right? And I think that there's such a value add as being a landowner and a land manager. Now, don't get me wrong, like, we're all hunters here. Like, I'd love to sit in a tree stand and I love to chase a turkey in the spring. But at the same time, I have a lot of value and appreciation that I'm putting on the month of June, July, August, September, all the different months of the year, because there's different ways that as a landowner or as a land manager, I can go out and improve my experiences in the fall or in the spring while turkey hunting or deer hunting, that I know that I value that just as much. So I take, a whole year time frame and know that I'm out there improving it, and I get so much enjoyment. And I don't have to wait around till deer season or turkey season, that short time window, to really enjoy creation or and just enjoy outside or enjoy a specific farm. I can literally enjoy it every single month of the year if I know I'm doing things to promote it.
And boy, it makes those harvests that much sweeter when you have that much sweat equity involved.
Absolutely does.
No question about that.
Yeah.
So, we've been talking a lot about habitat management. Surprise. Like, I think the four of us are always going to go there and can't avoid it. But, we were talking right before we started recording that one of the other things that we wanted to ask you guys, and we know that, obviously I don't have time to listen to all of our episodes, but of, some of the content that you've listened to or heard, from people that you've talked about it with, what are some of the things that have been takeaways for you from Wild Turkey Science?
The biggest thing that I hear from our clients and listeners because we've encouraged everybody to listen that's on our podcast that have listened to go and listen to your guys's. And the thing that really I remember having a lot of discussions about was the podcast you had with Craig Harper and the guy out of North Carolina, and was just the huge hole in brood rearing habitat and even nesting habitat, and then nesting habitat or early succession habitat that's getting mowed over, bush hogged. Like those are things that I think everyone that it's great for us. Like when we say, guys, nesting and brood rearing is very limited, but then all of a sudden you guys have real numbers to say, here you go. And they're like, I didn't realize it was that big of a problem. It's like, it's a huge problem. That's the one is like, people are starting to understand that there's a huge problem there.
Yeah. I would say it's the continued, the consistency of the information that you guys are providing all around turkeys. Is like, I feel like everyone has in their observations experienced, a decline, obviously to different scales across the listenership and across where we work and who we communicate with. But I think now with the consistent hyper-focused content, they're like Adam said, really beginning to see that this is not like a linear problem we're going to solve with just absolutely one thing to address. There's a lot of compounding issues here, and we need to understand life cycles. We need to understand predator-prey relationships. We need to understand habitat. We need to understand landscape uses, and then from a regional perspective, begin to apply these practices and put them on the landscape. But I think people they just initially start with, right, hey, things are going downward. What's the problem? Well, there's a lot of different problems. Therefore, there's going to be a lot of different ways to address those problems, and we'll find the solutions. But it's going to change for absolutely every person. There's not a silver bullet that's going to fix everything, or one technique that is going to change the outlook for the turkeys. It's a complex issue, but we need to then be, with it being complex, open-minded to understand all the different relationships that are happening regarding turkeys, regarding the landscape.
Well, I guess that's a good note to end on, Matt.
Well,
I said I left everyone speechless.
Well, I didn't know if you were following up. I've been experiencing a delay with you, so I was just trying to make sure that you were finished.
Yeah, that's a good one. I hadn't really thought of that.
Yeah, the consistency. I will say that's something that's been kind of eye-opening for me. Is the same thing. I have known, I guess, from my experience and talking to people and everything, what some problems are, but knowing the scale of that problem, and being able to put numbers on it has been pretty eye-opening. From one of them is the poultry rearing cover. The other one is the alternative land use, at least in the deep south, that is causing the paucity of that problem. That putting numbers on those things has really been eye-opening. And I guess the other thing that really has stuck out to me, and Will and I have belabored this point, I think, is how many holes there are in our knowledge. just from our base knowledge of
Mm-hmm.
what we have studied, and trying to fill those gaps. It has been super valuable for me as a researcher, seeing what's in the literature and also hearing what people are asking and trying to address that. It's feeding right back into the questions that I'm trying to ask from a research standpoint.
Do you guys feel, I want to follow up that. Do you feel like you're talking about the holes in your knowledge now with all the time you've spent and all the research you guys are doing? Do you feel like you have a, a better grasp of what's causing the decline? And the reason I'm asking this question is because for me, like listening to your guys' podcasts and my own observations as we're traveling around, it's like I feel like, man, like, okay, we got the picture. We found the biggest holes in the problem. Let's just, instead of waiting around talking about it, let's just grab a chainsaw and start burning and move on. And then we'll figure out other problems as we get going. And I feel like sometimes people are kind of waiting for the research to come out to say, like, there's another big gaping hole in the management or is some underlying disease. Where do you guys sit on that?
Well, we were just at the Wild Turkey Working Group, and when I say there's holes in our knowledge, I don't want to diminish the enormous amount of work that's being done on the species currently and that has been done.
Yep.
But we still have some big holes, and even trying to address what is going on. I think you guys were talking about it having a whole bunch of issues. Well, they also are changing in relative importance and across the landscape. The other problem is there are some issues that we know that are probably there that we don't even have any information on. You brought up feeding a few minutes ago. That's a big one. We don't have any information on it. Mm-hmm. We also need information on the relative role of strategies. Like, what is it? How much brood cover do you need? How connected does it need to be? What is the expected effect size? How does that compare to trapping? Right? We've got all these different questions on how to implement these different things. What is the role that hunting pressure is playing? How does changing season frameworks change the relative role of that pressure? Is it simply a symptom or is it a cause? We've got all these questions, and we saw a couple of we saw the abstract on it. I guess we saw one presentation related to disease. There were a couple of diseases that were quite a bit more prevalent than I expected in those studies. Mm-hmm. So we're going to have a segment at some point on diseases. We haven't gotten there yet. But the other thing is a lot of these things are feeding into one another. Like what one practice or problem is exacerbating another, right? Sometimes they are augmentative. So I'm still kind of in that space. I'm with you, Adam. I think we have enough information to know we need to be putting some brood rearing cover on the ground at landscape scale. I don't know how to do that other than to scream it into this microphone over and over again and go visit with people. But we probably know enough to know that's a big problem, and we can address that at the individual level on properties. But I don't think that we have ironed out some of these other landscape level problems and what their relative importance is and what the relative return on investment is of different strategies.
That's kind of exactly along the lines I was thinking, Marcus, especially that last point you made. I guess my answer to your question, Adam, depends on the scale that I'm thinking at, right? Yeah. And so if I'm thinking at the scale of a landowner that's got a good chunk, size of land in an area that has source populations of turkeys around it, I'm pretty confident I can make a lot of turkeys on that piece of property, right?
Yep.
But when you start thinking about it from the perspective of there are policies or there are things that need to be changed across statewide scales or region-wide scales to affect the populations at that greater extent, then there's a lot of data, like Marcus was saying, that we need to justify some of those actions. Does that make sense? And
Yeah.
so if we're thinking about, we need a justification to create, and there are some programs like this out there, I'm aware, but if we need to, incentivize managing for brooding cover to a greater extent than we currently are, we need the data to support that. So some of that is filling those information gaps to justify it to policymakers, and state wildlife agencies, and even federal wildlife agencies, to get those changes implemented at a large scale. But then if we're shrinking back down again and narrowing our focus to the individual property level, we have a pretty good handle on how to make a lot of turkeys at that scale.
Oh.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think, Adam, that's a great question to ask these two guys. But specifically for the audience, and Will, you addressed it really well. There is more than enough knowledge. And Adam and I, the two of you guys, have seen turkeys respond very well in a lot of different cases, in a lot of different regions, to doing quality habitat work that we've all talked about on this channel, on Land Legacies, during this episode. Do the practices. You don't need to wait around anymore on the landowner level, on your property. There is plenty enough information, data, peer-reviewed, researched information out there, what needs to be done, how to do it effectively, and that there's a lot of other landowners who show that it is working currently right now. They're seeing the gains. Don't wait around for any more information to improve what you have control over. There are more and bigger scale type things to be able to address, like you said, legislatively, levers that landowners, let's say, can't pull, but there is a lot that you can do, and that information's out there, clearly shows positive impacts. So do that, focus on that. Don't worry about the rest. If you need to change within, your property, a more refined harvest or bag limit, well, you can do that on your own scale, but don't worry what the state's necessarily doing. Be objective to what you have control over. And I think if people can really focus in on that, they're not going to be crying or singing the blues regarding turkeys if they are within your neighborhood or influence. They will respond, and we're seeing that greatly across landowners who are taking plans, absolutely running with them, hitting those low-hanging fruits. They're seeing the success.
Solid advice.
Yeah, for sure. I think I largely agree with you guys in principle on that. On the land, on property level, we have a lot of information about a few beneficial things, mainly habitat centric, that we know we can move the needle. I think where we don't have the information is on some practices that might be making us go backwards, or it's not the best use of your time. And principally, I think the focus on feeding and predators are those two things that really stick out to me.
Yeah. And I was thinking that policy decision too.
Yeah. Well, it's operating at different scales.
Right.
But at the individual choice scale, I think we largely know how to make a lot of turkeys, but there are still some other practices or influences on our time that might make us take a step backwards.
Yeah,
almost as if you're trying to increase the number of predators on your property.
I would say that is what some folks are trying to do, whether they know it or not.
Yeah, no doubt.
All right, guys. Well, I think that was a really fun episode. I appreciate you guys taking the time. It was very informative, great information for us as well to kind of get your perspective on what you're seeing on these properties you go on, since you have so much experience across such a large breadth of the landscape. So I appreciate it.
Nice to know that we haven't been too far off base.
Yeah, sounds like some of our information has been good, at least.
You guys are right on it. We've been every time we hear your podcast, we're like, yeah, preach it. That's what we see.
Yeah, from our perspective, we love seeing the research and knowing that, hey, what we're recommending it's peer reviewed, it's backed, right? Like, that's so helpful for us, confidence and what we think and see and do ourselves, right? But like to then be able to take it and give it out to everybody else, it's like, man, that is solid information. But appreciate you having us on, guys. We've enjoyed it. Keep up the good work.
So thanks for having us, guys.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, thank y'all. Appreciate your time. I'm sure if we all had the time, we could continue this conversation for a few more hours. But since we don't, I guess an hour and 20 or whatever we're at now will have to suffice. But we appreciate that.
There's turkeys to be made.
That's right.
That's right.
Well, thanks again, everybody out there, for listening. We really appreciate your support. The ratings, the comments, the messages. It's been amazing. Please keep it coming. You're helping us make this thing be successful, and we can't thank you enough for that.
Wild Turkey Science is part of the Natural Resources University podcast network and is made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow, a grassroots organization dedicated to the wild turkey. To learn more about TFT, check out turkeysfortomorrow.org.